popular uprising, peaceful demonstrations and marching is actually spreading. It is gathering momentum. It started 2 nights ago in Benghazi. Yesterday it was very, very fierce and strong in Al-Bayda, which is 200 kilometers east of Benghazi. Then it spread to Shahat, and also last night 2 other towns in the western region, the western mountain, called Zintan and Rujban. And this morning we hear that Jdabiya, another town west of Benghazi, 400 kilometers west of Benghazi, is erupting, as well as Benghazi is erupting again as we speak. And there are thousands and thousands marching and demonstrating in the center of Benghazi.
All right, at the same time, let's bring in Professor Owen. The sort of mass turnout that perhaps some hoped in the capital hasn't really materialized so far. Is this rebellion being snuffed out before it really gets into full swing?
Well, I don't think anybody can tell, but I think there are various things to say. This is a kind of second wave in which the demonstrators have had chances to learn about tactics and what works and what doesn't from the first wave. And I think probably we are seeing the revolutionary leadership of the Gaddafi regime rather uncertain about what to do with it. They've had plenty of time to think about it, but they don't want to overact. On the other hand, they want to snuff it out as quickly as possible. So I think it's really very difficult to say. But I think if one is to look at other parts of the Arab world, these things get a momentum up pretty quickly.
They do indeed, judging, as you said, by what's gone on elsewhere. Mr. Al-Gumati, what do the people want?
Well, the people obviously were, although motivated by social and economic suffering and disfranchisement, I think very quickly turned their slogans into political demands, and very clearly and vocally calling for regime change. The slogans were very clear. We want regime change. We want Gaddafi out. I think a bit similar to what happened in Tunisia and also perhaps in Egypt as well. Lack of political participation and engagement leads to economic suffering and social suffering as well. So the issues are intertwined and interconnected. So it is the whole package, and it is that people seem to have had enough of 41 years, the longest serving ruler in the world in the case of Colonel Gaddafi, and
right.
They are absolutely desperate for change, total change.
Nevertheless, we've seen protests breaking out mainly in the east of the country. Now, Professor Owen, you're someone who's familiar with the history of the Middle East and Libya. Can a revolution really take place without gripping the sort of Western centres of power in the country?
Well, it hasn't so far, but then each country is having its own kind of revolution, and so it may be that the country will look split for a while, and it may also be it's an oil country, and therefore I think the people in and around the capital are much more likely to be, as it were, on the payroll of the government and have an interest in its preservation. So I think Libya may be one of the first countries where there is a very clear division between those who support the regime and those who are against it.
All right, Mr. Al-Gumati, you're someone who's, shall we say, very familiar, at the very least, with one of the main opposition groups, the National Conference. What next, and who's really driving this? It doesn't seem to be the mainstream opposition groups, does it?
Well, no, I think this is spontaneous. This is within Libya. This is started by youth who are disfranchised, unemployed, not allowed to express themselves, not allowed to speak freely. In Libya, it's a very, very strict, very oppressive totalitarian regime. There is no tolerance whatsoever of freedom of speech or freedom of expression. So it's a spontaneous youth instigated, just like Tunisia and others. I don't think it was ever instigated or driven by opposition groups or any political elites. Opposition groups are not allowed within Libya anyway. So it is spontaneous, and I think it's just mass demonstrating on large numbers. Can I just also add something about Tripoli and the Western region? I think a bit like Tunisia, where the unrest started in the marginalized south, and then eventually it spread and got to the capital, and that's when it was concluded. I see that Libya will could probably follow a very similar scenario, where I think it's just a matter of time when Tripoli, the capital, which is highly populated with about 2 million population, which is about a third of the total Libyan population, will also get going, and I think that will be probably a decisive stage in the whole thing if the momentum keeps as it is and keeps going as it is.
Let's pick up on a point that you mentioned there of popular frustration. Professor Owen, according to some of the stats which I've seen, the oil revenues bring Libya about $50 billion a year. Where does the money go, and why are so many people left frustrated and unhappy?
Well, I think there has been a process of economic change in Libya, in which the oil revenues are now fueling a process, in fact, of privatization, but that there is a feeling that the profits of privatization are going to a small clique of people who are cronies of Gaddafi, and they're not being spread widely. And I think the other thing about these dictatorial regimes is that their governance capacity is very limited, and they don't have an ability to reach their people and target them, so that they're forced to do these large gestures of saying everybody has more money. But I think that's too late as far as the poor and unemployed people of Libya are concerned.
Is it too late, Mr. Al-Ghumati? Isn't it possible for now the regime to use its vast wealth to try and absorb some of that anger?
Well, believe it or not, that's exactly what Colonel Gaddafi has been trying over the last 2 weeks. He has suddenly found this sense of generosity with the Libyan population, and he started dishing out all sorts of what the locals call bribes, increasing salaries by 25%, taking out all sorts of taxes and duties, giving interest-free loans. But the populations are saying we are not going to fall for this. He had 41 years to take care of the country and distribute the wealth fairly. And why is it just now? We don't believe it. We think that he's just trying to ride the waves and avoid the storm. So I don't think the population at large are falling for these last-minute bribes.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about what's been happening over the last 40 years. Of course, the country has been tightly controlled by Gaddafi. Let's take a quick look at what he has done during his rule. Well, he embraced the pan-Arabism introduced by the Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser. In the 1970s, he tried to merge Libya, Syria and Egypt into a federation, but he failed. In 1977, he renamed the country the Great Socialist Popular Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, or the State of the Masses. His system of government revolved around the idea of people airing their views at open congresses. In 1992, the UN imposed sanctions on Libya to pressure the government to hand over suspects in the 1988 Lockerbie bombing over Scotland. Well, he was accused of terrorism by the West, but in 2003 he abandoned his program of prohibited weapons and took responsibility for Lockerbie. In 2004, US President George W. Bush ended a trade embargo. And most recently, in a telling interview, he spoke of Tunisia's uprising being hijacked by foreign intervention. Let's go over and get the perspective now of Professor Owen once again. How do you think the US is seeing the prospect of instability in a country like Libya, which used to be, if I could say, in the other camp, and the US has just succeeded not a long time ago in sort of wooing it over to its camp?